Hi friends, it's Andrew Goodall here again from Nature's Image Photography, and here's the latest in my series of how I took this photo videos. In this video I'm going to tell you how this photo was taken, and I'm not just talking about the camera settings, I'm going to try and give you the whole story. Now before we get started, be sure to click that subscribe button if you haven't already for more videos like this one and plenty more from my world of photography. So now onto the photo. I posted a similar image in one of my videos on the Panasonic Lumix G9 recently, and the interest and the comments I received was the main reason I decided to make this video. One of the first comments was a question on how I got such a dark background, and I'm sure some people think this must be done using some fancy studio lighting. But in truth it was much simpler than that, so I'm going to start by showing you my very unglamorous setup for this shot. Here's where my photo was taken, and let me start by saying thanks to my mate Wendy for the assist. As you can see, there's nothing fancy about where the shot was taken, but there are two important factors that went into creating the look for this photo. Notice Wendy's holding the balloon in the sun, but notice also the big patch of shade in the background. This shot you're looking at the moment was taken with a wider angle lens, but I used a telephoto lens to take the actual water balloon shots. I was using my Panasonic G9 with a 100 to 400mm lens, zoomed to a little over 100mm. Being a micro 4/3 camera, you can effectively double that focal length, so this was equivalent to using over 200mm on a full frame camera. That telephoto lens narrows the angle of view, so now it's very easy for me to shoot my sunlit subject with a patch of shadow behind. All I had to do was make sure Wendy held the balloon in the right spot. And here are a couple of shots to show you just how much difference that makes. Hold the balloon against a sunny patch and the background is almost as bright as the subject. A little lower and clearly that's not going to work. But hold the balloon in front of a patch of shade and the natural contrast of sunlight and shadow makes the subject really stand out from the background. Next, it's important to make sure I get the exposure right. With so much dark area in this shot, the camera would want to let in extra light to prevent underexposing the majority of the image. So shooting in auto, I would have ended up with a photo like this. But I shoot in manual mode, so I'm able to decrease the exposure simply by setting a faster shutter speed. And watch how much difference that makes. At an 800th of a second, which is what the camera would have chosen, I get a reasonable exposure on the background and an overexposed subject. As I set the shutter speed faster, the exposure gets darker. Note that I'm changing only the shutter speed. The ISO and the aperture stay the same. As I said, I do this in manual exposure, but you could do the same in AV using exposure compensation. By the time I get to a speed that gives me best exposure on the balloon, the background is so dark that it's almost black. By the way, why am I shooting at ISO 400? Well, I know that above all, for this project I need a fast shutter speed to freeze that moment when the dart pierces the balloon, and putting the ISO up a little is what makes it possible for me to use an ultra-fast shutter. Now, in the interests of full disclosure, the settings I finally used for the main photo in this video were just a little different, so here is a full rundown of my actual camera settings. I'm still using ISO 400, but I have closed the aperture down just a little to f6.3 in the hope of getting a bit more depth of field. I'm not sure it made much difference in the outcome, but anyway, that's what I used. And then because my aperture was just a bit smaller, my shutter speed was just a bit slower to maintain the exposure. As you can see, still very fast at a 2500th of a second. Now to complete the story, my autofocus area mode was on single point. That makes it easy for me to make sure the camera focuses exactly where I want it to. My autofocus mode was on one shot, also known as AFS or autofocus single. That meant I could focus and hold my finger on the button to keep it locked, ready for the final press when the big moment comes. Also, most cameras can shoot at a faster frame rate using AFS because the camera doesn't have to keep refocusing while the button's pressed. And that brings me to my release mode, which of course was on fast continuous or burst mode. Don't imagine for a moment that I have the split-second timing to take one perfectly timed shot for a project like this. We simply said 1, 2, 3, go, and then I held the button down as Wendy threw the dart. I was then able to pick the best shot out of many. And believe me, there were many rejects. Just because I thought you might be interested, here's a sequence of shots taken from this burst. These were shot on the Panasonic Lumix G9 at 60 frames per second. And these aren't the entire sequence, just the ones worth looking at. There were about 25 shots before these where the dart wasn't even in the picture yet. Now, you don't need the most modern camera with such a super fast frame rate to try this yourself. I've done similar shots in the past on my Pentax K3 Mark II, which shoots at just 8 frames per second and still got some great results. Of course, the faster your frame rate, the better your chances, but really if you have any kind of DSLR camera, you can give this a go and expect to get a result. So finally, after several attempts and many wasted shots, I ended up with my favourite picture of the day. All that remained was to crop the image to cut out the hands and then do a bit of editing, which mostly amounted to adding some contrast and increasing the blacks, and I had a shot that was worth showing off. And that's the story of how I took this photo. It's not perfect and there are things I think I could do better. Next time I'll try to make sure the dart is more parallel to the camera so it stays in focus along with the balloon. And I might try a higher ISO for an even faster shutter speed. But overall I'm pretty happy with this one, and I hope for some of the people who watch this video it might give you the confidence to go out and try something similar. Now thanks for sticking with this video right to the end, and before you go don't forget to subscribe. I'm Andrew Goodall, this is Nature's Image Photography. Thanks for watching.